Hello, and welcome to Sustainability Marketing Lecture 8 on Communications. This is part of our exploration of the sustainability marketing mix within the total sustainability marketing management process. And this is episode 3, the case study of One Water. In episode 1, we looked at communications media. In episode 2, we looked at developing sustainability marketing messages. In this episode, we'll look at the case study of One Water, in which we'll see how they used particular media and put together particular messages to launch and develop their own particular sustainability marketing brand. In terms of learning outcomes, this should help us to understand the types of communications challenges that are faced by new sustainability-orientated brands who are trying to enter into a particular market, and also appreciate the role that different communications media can play in getting that brand established and developed within a market. In terms of the structure of this particular episode, we'll look at the business model that One Water developed, which was quite an innovative model within its market. We'll look at the marketing communications issues that arose as they sought to develop their business and launch it. And also we'll see a short video looking at One and also one of their corporate partners, Total, in Africa, and how the brand has developed and really contributed to a particular sustainability marketing issue. And finally, we'll look at how the brand is developing in the future and what the future might hold for the business model that they developed and the opportunities that might come from it. In terms of what One Water were trying to address, it was actually the problem of water in Africa. The business was founded by Duncan Goose, who was a former advertising executive who'd worked in the advertising industry for many years and eventually took a sabbatical off and travelled the world. And it was while he was in Africa, he became very sensitive to the problems that water caused in Africa in terms of development, in terms of health, in terms of people's quality of life. And in Lecture 3, Frank took you through some of the issues of social and ecological problems worldwide, including water and poverty, and often their combination are a significant challenge in countries within continents like Africa. If we look at the global level, it's around 1 billion people still do not have access to clean water for drinking and for washing. It leads to around 2 million deaths every year from contaminated water. And also, it's not just the quality of the water in terms of consumption, it's also its accessibility. For many people, the nearest source of clean water is many miles away, and it includes very arduous journeys to and from the sources of water to bring the water to the people. And these were some of the issues that Duncan saw while he was in Africa and came back to the UK, determined to develop a business to do something about that. So the business he launched was as a social enterprise called Global Ethics in 2005. And it was based on what Duncan called a like-for-like business model. So in other words, if the customer buys a bottle of water in the UK, then the profits from that water will go to fund water development projects in Africa. And the way in which they chose to do that was through the Roundabout Play Pumps charity. And a Roundabout Play Pump is a very simple, a very fun idea really, of using a screw-type well attached to a roundabout that children can play on to pump water up to a storage tank. And you can see a storage tank with the One logo on the slide behind me. And so you put these near a school, near where the children can play. They can enjoy themselves playing on the playground, playing on the roundabout, and in doing so pump water up out of the ground into the storage tower for the community. So it's a very simple way to provide free, clean, sustainable water sources for those communities within Africa and move away from issues of contaminated water and some of the backbreaking journeys that local people had to undertake to get that water to their villages. It was, however, once Duncan had made that decision to get into that market, it was quite a tough market to enter. If you look at the UK bottled water market, it's worth around, at the time of launch, £2.3 billion each year, but it was very much dominated by a few very large companies, a small number, very large companies. Evian, Vittel, Highland Spring. These were major players who they would spend between £1 and £4 million each year just on advertising to keep their brands strong and keep consumers very much aware of them. There was something like 200 other small brands, kind of minnows within the market, very often struggling for survival, A small number using social or environmental issues as the basis of their marketing, but very few. It was, however, a growing market, growing at around 6 to 7% a year at the time that one was launched. But it's a very difficult market for a brand new brand to try and make an impression on. A lot of the problems that Duncan faced early on were to do with marketing communications, with how to get people aware of the brands, how to get it into stores in the first place. I think one of the initial things he discovered was that the major retailers were quite conservative in their approach, that although they thought the brand was a nice idea, and they were very supportive of the idea of an ethical and sort of cause-related brand, they weren't necessarily willing to give up shelf space from one of their established brands for this new brand to be seen on the supermarket shelves. The company tried selling fairly directly to restaurants, for example, or other types of places where people eat and drink, and they had some small success, but even after 6 months they were really having trouble becoming seen, really, in the market. Their break came when they managed to persuade the organisers of the Live 8 event in Hyde Park, the major concert to tackle global poverty. They managed to persuade the organisers to adopt One Water, even though it was a very new brand, as the official brand for the event. And there were pictures in the media of Brad Pitt and other celebrities like Annie Lennox holding a bottle of the water. So in terms of generating some instant profile, that was really quite useful for the brand. But even so, it didn't really solve their problem of how to get the bottles onto retailers' shelves. They felt for the retailers that you would have communications benefits, for example, that when a water tower was established in Africa, you could have that painted using the company's brand. And although you wouldn't have a great deal of passing traffic to actually see the brand when it was up on a water tower in Africa, in terms of the corporate communications benefits, they thought it would be quite significant. And that a particular retailer, for example, could sponsor a pump. But they still found the retailers very reluctant to get involved. Duncan even tried a very innovative pricing strategy of saying that the retailers could charge, or I should say could pay the charge they liked. So long as they covered the cost of the water to one, they could basically put whatever margin on the product they liked, even down to a single penny, if they just take the water on board. And in some ways, the retailers found this was a very strange way to do business. They weren't really accustomed to suppliers coming in and saying you can choose your own price. So they actually almost rejected one as a proposition because it was too radical in terms of this pricing strategy. And they didn't really have a marketing budget to engage in a very large-scale communications campaign to begin with. So it was very difficult for them to break into the market. But they did look to use such money as they had cost-effectively on things like poster campaigns, which are less expensive than media advertising through radio or television. And they also used, from the word go, online media to try and be as effective as they could and maybe to be innovative compared to some of the existing brands in terms of the types of online communication that they used. And got some of the examples of some of their marketing communication that they used. For example, they used sales promotion. One of the early things they did was to offer customers the chance to win a trip to Africa by entering the competition associated with the product. They used poster campaigns in things like tube and railway stations, bus stops, for example. Very much used celebrity endorsement when they could. Duncan had an unusual advantage over most of his competitors in that his sister was a very well-known actor within the UK. So she managed to persuade quite a number of friends within acting to act as brand ambassadors. One of those was David Tennant, who was the Doctor Who of the time, and to have a high-profile celebrity like Doctor Who endorsing your brand was obviously very helpful for a young brand trying to make its way in the market. They also, again, concentrated on events, other events, as well as Live 8, to try and get their water seen and used on these things. But the website was very important. They understood, I think, from early on, the importance of word of mouth, as they called it. So consumers could click onto the website and use it to send a message to friends, what they call a message in a bottle, linked to a bottle of One Water, and inviting friends to view the website, learn about the brand, and maybe become a supporter of it. Customers could also nominate heroes through the website. So people who they thought were making a social or environmental difference could be nominated and voted for through the website. Perhaps most unusually, One, although it was a very small, very new brand, it was the first brand in Europe to use quick response codes, the QR codes that you see nearly everywhere now, where if you hold a smartphone up to the code, it will take you straight to the website. And Duncan had seen this technology used initially in Japan, so he integrated it into the poster campaigns that One used eventually, so that customers could look at a One Water poster, click our photo with their smartphone, which would take them straight through to the website, where they could donate money to water causes in Africa, they could sign up for promotional benefits, and also view media footage, for example, from the website. So quite unusual to see a young, small brand actually taking a lead in a particular online communications technique, such as the use of quick response code, but One were able to do that. In terms of finally breaking into the market, it was interesting that it came not through a conventional retailer, as most FMCG brands have to do. It was actually through an oil or petrol company, Total, who run retailing operations within their petrol stations. And the concept of One Water really appealed to Total for several reasons, partly because Total were Africa's #1 retailing operation within Africa, and so they were very keen to do something in terms of cause-related marketing that made a contribution within Africa. And also they had developed their own corporate social responsibility strategy based around the concept of community contribution. So linking up with One Water and supporting them really appealed to Total in terms of supporting their own CSR strategy. So they offered Total a very preferential deal of stocking it within all their UK stores linked to their petrol stations. They actually provided marketing support to the company, so they funded the initial public relations campaign that was set up nationally for One. They paid for posters and displays materials for One to be developed. And that national campaign was a great success. It began a little slowly. It actually really took off when they introduced a buy one, get one free promotional offer as another type of media to try and get consumer interest going. And gradually that did allow the brand to take off, to begin selling. And interestingly then, the cooperative, who positioned themselves as the UK's leading company in terms of ethical retail, when they saw the brand starting to be established through the Total retailers, they felt, well, they should have this brand too. You know, if there's an ethical water on the market, they should be the ones to stock it. So it was instantly stocked in all the cooperative stores in the UK. It was the first brand ever in the UK to be stocked in all cooperative stores from the word go. It wasn't just introduced slowly, it had an immediate national launch. And once it was seen succeeding in those stores, then the other national retailers, the major ones like Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Asda and Morrison's, became much more interested in stocking this brand. And there was also a tendency to then move it into other channels away from the conventional retailers. So, for example, universities, schools through vending machines became very major customers. And so eventually, the market was cracked. But it was a very difficult, I think, operation trying to get this new brand into the market. Much of it, I think, came down to Duncan himself as an individual. He made many, many appearances at events, speaking at conferences, going into universities to talk about the brand, the concept behind it, and how it developed. And ultimately was successful. But I think what was interesting about the story in many ways is the number of different media that he had to employ to get that brand sufficiently visible, to get consumers to understand it, and to get enough consumers to buy into it, to start to get the momentum behind it, that the major retailers in particular would take it seriously and to stock it. And the way in which it linked into not just a brand level strategy for One, but it also fitted very nicely into the corporate social responsibility strategy of Total. And I said at the beginning of episode 8 that you see sustainability marketing communications operating at these two levels, at the brand level where One were operating, and at the corporate level, which is very much where Total were operating in this partnership. So I'd like to now show you a very short video, about 10 minutes long, which shows the early development of the brand. It shows you something about the issues that it sought to tackle, the problems of water and water poverty in Africa, and the way in which One and Total came together to get the first wells and to get the first successful development of the product and the water projects in Africa underway. Well, that video very nicely illustrated some of the issues that One Water sought to tackle in terms of water poverty in Africa, and also some of the marketing issues that it had to tackle in order to get successfully established in the market, and how the relationship with Total helped them to do that. As I said, the product has struggled in the market for the first 6 months, going very slowly, yet by the end of the first year, it had achieved a market share of around 200,000 bottles of water a day, which was really a tremendous achievement. By the end of 2011, the brand had raised £7.6 million in total for water development and some other projects in Africa as well. And it's estimated that around 2 million Africans had their lives improved through the work of One Water, and through the sales of a product as simple as bottled water on a sustainability marketing basis, and using the very innovative like-for-like business model that One had developed. An interesting question for One was, well, could they do more with this business model? On the left of the slide there, you see the original concept of developing bottled water to sell, so that people in buying water in the UK were contributing to water projects in Africa and the solution to water poverty there. And so it occurred to One, well, perhaps there were other types of market they could move into on the same proposition. So, for example, there are a lot of problems with sanitation projects or sanitation issues in Africa. So whether you could sell One soap in countries like the UK to fund sanitation projects in Africa, and also the obvious problem in Africa that needs to be tackled is HIV/AIDS, and whether you could sell condoms, for example, using the profits from those to fund HIV/AIDS programs in Africa. And so what One has sought to do is extend the brand both geographically. You can find One Water now in countries like America, countries like Australia, increasingly in Europe, as well as in the UK, to expand the brand through channels, in terms of moving away from retailers into things like universities and schools, as I mentioned, but also stretching the brand concept into other types of product that can be bought by consumers in ways that the profits go to fund these like-for-like types of projects and issues in Africa. So in terms of reviewing this particular episode, you might like to think about questions about why One was able to succeed eventually in the bottled water market, a very mature, very competitive market, and a very difficult one for a young brand. It's also worth reflecting that bottled water itself has sometimes been the subject of environmental criticism. The idea that water is a product that generally one can get from a tap and drink without any particular packaging, and so does bottled water just create other environmental problems linked to things like overpackaging? It's an issue that One have very much had to deal with, and have tried to deal with, for example, through information on their website. But you might like to think about some of the difficulties that might pose to a brand who are trying to market themselves on a sustainability basis. And also, I mentioned the extension of the like-for-like business model that One employs, and you might like to think about and discuss quite what are the limits to that like-for-like business model, and what other opportunities you might be able to think of that could be used to tackle particular problems in countries like Africa, or in countries within Africa. In terms of references, again, I'd point you towards chapter 8 in our book, because the case study that introduces the chapter focuses on One Water, as well as talking about the issues throughout the chapter that One had to deal with. And finally, the best source for information about One itself is the One Water website, www.onedifference.org, where you can find a whole range of information, including videos, reports, publications, details of events that One has been present at, some of the awards that it's won, and really the philosophy behind the company and its brand, and the way in which it's trying to tackle problems in Africa. So thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.